Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, co-founder and chief academic officer here at Newsela, and I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. As we do each Friday, we're going to offer you a recap of the week's news. And this week, we have two stories that are worth your attention. One's a major product release. The other is a recap of policy and the landscape in which that release is actually happening. So we're going to spend 10 minutes walking through both of them because understanding what Anthropic just released is hard to do without understanding the fragmented policy environment it's arriving into. So let's begin. On July 14th, Anthropic launched Claude for Teachers. It's free for verified K-12 teachers in the US with a full year of access. Companies joining Google, OpenAI, and Microsoft in what's basically becoming an arms race over teacher adoption. Here's what the product actually does in practice. Anthropic released a promotional video featuring Karina, an elementary teacher with a lot of English language learners, and she shows how she uses it. She gives Claude a voice command. She says, pull my lesson from TeachFX. Tell me what resonated with students and what didn't. Review my talk time, questioning, and engagement. Then draft tomorrow's lesson plan based on what you found. Align it to state standards and California's ELD standards for my English learners. Claude does that. It finds her lesson in TeachFX, the actual recording of the lesson and how it landed with her students, and comes back with two things: a coaching summary and tomorrow's lesson plan, already adapted to what happened today. The coaching feedback is specific. Her opening hook worked. Her turn and talks landed. Her student talk ratio is good. Kids are talking more than she is, which is what TeachFX is helping raise her awareness of. And all of this is what she wants. But here's where she can improve, it says. She asked good open-ended questions, but she didn't leave enough wait time for students to think. So her one thing for tomorrow is simple. Ask the question, then wait 5 seconds. That's feedback she used to wait for her instructional coach to give her. Now she gets it the same day. Then Karina asked Claude to keep doing that every weekday at 4 p.m. While she's driving home, Claude's reviewing how her lesson went and getting tomorrow's lesson ready. Pitch is straightforward. Teachers don't have endless time. Instructional coaching, differentiation, alignment of standards, all of that takes a lot of labor. And if AI can genuinely reduce that, it matters. But here's where I want to pause. This workflow surfaces some real questions that Anthropic's privacy documentation doesn't fully answer. The data flow here is very specific. TeachFX classroom audio, which includes student voices, student responses, potentially student names, teacher voice commands about standards and lesson content, assessment data. All of that is flowing into Claude. Then the output, which is the coaching summaries and the lesson plans, is flowing back out. What privacy agreements are in place between TeachFX, Claude, and Karina's district? If the district hasn't signed agreements with both vendors covering this data integration, is this legal under FERPA? They aren't hypothetical concerns. This use case sparked real conversation on LinkedIn and educator networks because it's not theoretical. Anthropic is actively promoting a workflow that depends on data moving between at least 2 third-party systems, and the privacy documentation kind of glosses over that. So what does Anthropic actually claim about protecting all this data? They say conversations won't be used to train Claude. They use the term FERPA-aligned and mention a K-12 data processing addendum. Teachers can delete chats anytime. They highlight AES 256 encryption, multi-factor authentication, annual third-party audits, SOC 2 certifications. All of that's solid infrastructure language. But what the documentation actually leaves vague is what happens when you delete a chat. It says that when you delete a chat, it's gone from your dashboard, quote unquote. That doesn't address what happens to conversation metadata or audit logs or backups. And the term FERPA-aligned gets repeated but never defined. And the documentation doesn't address what happens if Anthropic receives a court order. That last one matters because there's a precedent here. OpenAI promised users they could delete their chat data, which would be automatically removed within 30 days. But in a lawsuit with the New York Times, a judge ordered OpenAI to retain all the chat data, even deleted conversations, for litigation purposes. OpenAI then had to reverse its privacy promise. So voice commands and coaching summaries that teachers think are being deleted might be retained indefinitely if Anthropic faces legal pressure. Now, I'm not saying Claude for Teachers won't protect student data. I'm saying that aligned is the important word in FERPA-aligned. It means Anthropic wrote their terms with FERPA in mind. It doesn't mean that your district's actual use automatically meets federal law. That's a determination your district's legal counsel needs to make. And in Karina's case, that determination involves not just Claude, but also TeachFX, which is where the sensitive data originates. It's also worth noting that Claude for Teachers is an individual educator offering right now. A dedicated offering for schools and districts is, not surprisingly, coming soon. But a teacher can sign up individually and give voice commands to Claude, and Claude can access her TeachFX recordings at the same time that her district may not have agreements in place covering that data flow. That's something you're going to want to understand very well before you automate your daily workflow. Now let's look at the policy context in which this Claude launch is happening. Federal AI regulation in K-12 education is basically non-existent. The Education Department issued a Dear Colleague letter outlining how AI may be used in schools. It's guidance, not a mandate. It's from the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, who announced a supplemental grant priority for, quote, advancing AI in education, unquote. So the federal government is steering dollars towards adoption, but they're not setting rules. Congress has shown some interest, not surprisingly. Representative Randy Fine introduced the K-12 AI Literacy and Readiness Act, but that's about teaching students about AI, not regulating its use in classrooms. The main federal guardrails here are FERPA, which governs student data policy, and COPA, which protects children online. COPA got amended in 2025 with stricter consent requirements taking effect by April 2026. Those are broad frameworks. They're not AI specific. So because the federal government isn't regulating, states are rushing in to fill the vacuum, and they're doing it unevenly. An EdSurge study from this month found wide variation in how districts govern AI. Nearly 44% of districts allow AI use only when teachers explicitly approve it. But implementation and enforcement are inconsistent. And with this inconsistency comes fragmentation. A teacher in one district has guardrails, while 5 miles away across a state border, another doesn't. The numbers are striking as well. This year, 134 bills related to AI in education have been introduced across 31 states. 6 states have already enacted AI education laws. Legislation is pending in at least a dozen more. California has a bill prohibiting the use of student data to train AI models. Idaho requires data privacy protections for AI tools. Oklahoma and Maryland require human oversight and ban AI for making high-stakes decisions about students. South Carolina is proposing some of the strongest statewide guardrails, including written parental opt-in consent, annual public disclosure of AI tools and data practices, prohibitions on replacing teachers in core instruction, restrictions on automated decision-making without meaningful human review. Ohio, meanwhile, just hit a July 1st deadline requiring every school district to adopt a formal AI use policy. That's over 600 districts scrambling to write policy with unclear guidance from the state about what that policy should actually contain. So there's a gap. Schools operating in one state might have protection. 5 miles away, there's none. Federal guidance encourages adoption. Federal regulation is silent. States are moving at different speeds in different directions. And into this fragmented landscape, you've got vendors launching products. Claude for Teachers arrives in a policy vacuum. Anthropic is making claims about privacy alignment and data protection, and they may be entirely truthful. But whether any given district's use actually satisfies FERPA depends on that district's specific governance. Each school's legal counsel needs to evaluate independently. The Anthropic announcement itself is interesting because it doesn't hide the complexity. They're explicit about the ecosystem integration. TeachFX is right there on the list of partners. They're working with the American Federation of Teachers to develop gold standards for privacy. They're transparent about what they're claiming and what they're not, which I think is actually pretty refreshing. But the promotional video showing the closed loop workflow, classroom audio going to Claude, recommendations coming back on their drive home, that video is demonstrating a use case that raises all the questions about data provenance that the privacy documentation doesn't fully address. So that's our 2-story week. One is a major product release from a company that's thoughtful about privacy and positioning itself as the educator-first AI company. And the other is a policy landscape where federal guidance encourages adoption, but federal regulation is absent, and states are trying to figure out how to do this on their own. So what I'm actually curious about is, are you using Claude for Teachers? What are you doing with it? If you started experimenting with Claude in your classroom this past year, did you use it as a thinking partner? If you did, what's working? What's not? Are you running into privacy concerns? Pedagogical questions like we've been talking about. And if you're thinking about using it, have you started having conversations with your district about whether the data flows involved, especially if you're integrating with other tools, are covered under your current agreements? I'd love to hear from you. Teachers often see adoption decisions from a different angle than policymakers do. So I want to know what you're actually experiencing. Send me your notes, your concerns, your experiments. That's where I think the real learning is really going to happen in the next several months. Thanks as always for spending this time. I'll see you next episode. On Monday, we're going to pick up with episode 2 in our 4-part series on the implications of teacher use of AI. We'll see you then.